Well, hello. This is another episode of National Divorce Talk Raw with your host, Marc Ruiz Evans. Sorry about that, a little bit of technical difficulties. Well, we have some very interesting news that happened recently. So, Ron Perlman, the actor, is another major actor who's a liberal who has said that the idea of national divorce is a reasonable idea to talk about. We're going to spend today's episode talking about what Sarah Silverman had said earlier, what Ron Perlman had said, the comments for Sarah Silverman's endorsement of the concept, the comments for Ron Perlman's endorsement of the concept, and how accurate those comments are. So I'm going to show you the sources of the people who said those two different things. We're going to look at what people said in response to that, if they supported it, if they did not, and then we'll take a look at the accuracy of the claims made by various members of the public. Again, trying to keep you informed of this conversation as it continues to develop. Let's get right into it. So here's Ron Perlman. This came out yesterday or recently. It's time that every state, they would elect Republicans to represent them, and all of the rest of us separate. You don't want to live in my world, and I certainly don't want to live in yours. This is related to the topic of national divorce and states separating from other states, red and blue. Now, here is the original statement by Sarah Silverman made in September 2021. So what is that? September, October, November, December, January, February. So about 5 months ago, maybe 5 to 6 months ago, Silverman made this statement. Let's take a listen.
I mean, this may be a negative thought, or maybe a positive one. I don't know. But if people aren't getting along, like in relationship, they break up, So like, why don't we just finally just realize that these states aren't working and like divide up into like 2 or 3 countries of like USA 1 and USA 2. And they can be USA 1. Like the conservatives can be USA 1 because they love being number 1 and it means something to them. And I'd love to have that be theirs. They can be USA 1, we'll be USA 2, and we'll be allies. And you'll come over here and we'll go over there. And, when you come to many times when you go to a different country, you have to get a vaccine. That's that.
So I understand a lot of people are going to look at this and say, who cares what Hollywood actors say? But the point is that the conversation is becoming normalized. So if you look back 2 years ago, you would have only seen politicians who were known as extreme politicians, possibly alt-right politicians, and people who were part of the alt-right sphere talking about this concept. Now we have mainstream actors. And the reason that I like to talk about that is not because I think that it makes the topic more important, but because in this country, people pay attention to what actors say. Actors are routinely punished if they say something that's out of line with what society wants. So when we see an actor talk about national divorce and there is no blowback and there is no punishment and they are not removed from their job and nobody says anything negative about them, that's normalization of the concept. I'm not looking at the actors as individual people. I'm not even talking about their acting prowess. What I'm talking about is that someone is controlled by the power structure. They make a statement and no one in the power structure criticizes them. That is normalization. So an actor says something, it's wrong, they'll be criticized. Hey, you can't say that. And what that does is send signals out that you're not allowed to talk about certain things or make certain statements. Nobody did that for Ron Perlman. And 5 to 6 months ago, nobody did that for Sarah Silverman. Ron Perlman is a recognized mainstream actor. And Sarah Silverman works for the Disney company. Nobody criticized them. So apparently we have reached a point where now it's okay for mainstream actors and people in Hollywood who are mainstream with major corporate media backing to talk about the idea of national divorce and support it and not be criticized. That's normalization. Let's take a look at what some of the comments are for Perlman, and we'll compare them to the comments made for Silverman 6 months earlier and see if there's commonality in those comments. And then, of course, as always, we'll verify the veracity of those claims. Let's take a look now. So here we go. The South is pretty beyond saving. Do people realize that Black people are in the South? So it's not just based on just religion, it's ideology. And BF, you say vote research the voter suppression laws. I'm in a very red state, in a red community, and I'm surrounded by some middle blue neighbors, so it's not all that bad. But if they made a program that allowed us to leave and take up residence in a non-red state, it would make the transition much easier and possible. So this person's talking about what they would call the great sort. You're a conservative and you live in a liberal state, or you're a liberal and you live in a red state. The government or someone would buy your house and give you money to move. So they basically buy you out so that if you wanted to move, you're like, okay, great, move. We're going to buy out your house so you don't lose anything. There's no drama. There's no reason for you to feel bad or like something horrible is going to happen to you. Somebody came, they bought you your house or wherever you rented. They made you financially whole and they gave you assistance to go travel to the other place. This person's saying, hey, that's a good deal. The balkanization of America would be a disaster beyond your imagination. This isn't the way. We're going to get to that in a minute. You're going to see a lot of people talking about how there are pockets of red and blue states and there's pockets of blue and red states. And so you can't actually have a separation by the states. We'll look into that in a second. A lot of support. So here you go. This is the way that the conversation goes. I support it. I support it. No, that would be so horrible. Then here's another one. So if the regions, this is another major criticism. So if the states broke off, the idea is that they would automatically build walls, have competing armies, and stop trading with each other. So if there are three nations of America, they would immediately build a wall, cut each other off, and there'd be no trade. Basically, the imagination is that we would go to a North Korea, South Korea demilitarized zone. Nothing like how Germany's a separate country from France, but they still have a lot of travel between them. The imagination for a lot of people who criticize this idea is that America would not go to an EU type system where different countries are able to relate with each other, or even something like Southeast Asia, where Vietnam and Indonesia are separate countries, but they have a lot of trade deals and a lot of travel deals. No, the imagination for people who criticize this idea is that it would automatically go North Korea, South Korea, demilitarized zone, or the harshest possible relationship between any two countries. We're not doing that. There's no red states. There's no blue states. There's only a United States. That's another one. Like, hey, there's no real differences. We're all Americans underneath. That's another talking point. And then here's someone saying, well, you haven't spent a lot of time in red states, have you? I mean, are you actually seeing the people that you're saying or think just like you? What about us stuck in states that elect Republicans because of bad voting laws and gerrymandering and just plain numbers? Do you really want a blue state? Do you really want your blue state with a pissed off Republican minority? So again, that's the pockets of conservatives in blue states, pockets of liberals in red states. If your senator is a member of Congress and votes against the funding or infrastructure, your state district shouldn't get any money. That will change real things real fast. So this is another comment on Americans are broken. The system still works. People just aren't using the system the right way. And if you use the system the right way, everything would work out totally fine. Actually, this is getting a little deep. So let's get into this. I'm going to start pointing out who's right and who's wrong. So this idea of people having a property bought out so that they can move to another area, a lot of people support that. And a large reason why people would not want to move is that they would be afraid that they would lose their financial standing. If they were guaranteed that their financial standing would be the same after they transfer to the new area, or it would improve, then they would usually have a positive opinion about that. And the reason that we know that is a lot of people who've left California went to a place not because the politics were better, as much as they say that. So a lot of Californians left, and they may say California is too liberal and the business climate, and the culture's out of whack. Maybe. But the reason that these Californians moved to Nevada, Arizona, Texas, Florida, New Mexico is because it was cheaper to live there and they got more money for their dollar. Nobody's leaving California and going, I cannot stand California's policies. Let me move to a more expensive location where I get even less stuff and have an even smaller home. So you look at everybody who's leaving California, they are financially better off. That's why they moved. They're not moving to a place and going, wow, the cost of living is so much more here. My financial situation is worse. But hey, the culture's better. That's not what you see with the people who are leaving. So this idea of people being made financially whole as a prerequisite for their support for separation has a lot of evidence backing it, simply based upon the way that people are moving around the country already. So here's one of my other ones. The balkanization of America would be a disaster beyond your imagination. This isn't the way. And what they're talking about is, again, pockets of red and blue, pockets of blue and red. Let me see if I can find a map showing that it's here. There's a very popular map that conservatives routinely point to. Here you go. That's not even it. That's more accurate than what they usually pull up. This is the map. So this is what people talk about balkanization. So they go, here's these pockets of blue surrounded by red, or maybe here you have mostly blue, but then there's pockets, even in New York, there's little pockets of red. And in here, there's little pockets of red surrounded by blue. And then you really have a myriad of little dots of blue. And they said, if you separated this, it's going to turn into Czechoslovakia. It'll be totally balkanized. Maybe. But I'd also point out, take a look at Texas. It's mostly red except for this one area. So there's one or two pockets. Okay. But the entire rest of the state's red. A lot of these states are mostly red. So they could separate, and there really wouldn't be a large minority population. Let's take a look at Nevada. Only this tail end, the Las Vegas area, is liberal. The rest of the state isn't. You could break off this one and make it a separate state, and then have the rest of this be conservative. It would largely be intact with all of its same infrastructure and borders staying intact. So the idea that everybody's going to become balkanized is not true. A lot of states are overwhelmingly red or overwhelmingly blue, and the amount of minorities left is infinitesimal. And basically, it's near a border area. Like this is near the border of California and Arizona. It could easily leave, become its own state, or join these other two states. Same thing with this. It's near the border area. Same thing with this. You can see the blue is here near the edge of one area. These red parts here could separate from that, and you would not have balkanization. Same thing here. Chicago is another famous example. And then even the West Coast, you could cut off this part of blue, leaving the majority red. That would not have balkanization. You would have holistic wholes. When we look at California, though, one thing I want to point out is that everybody's wrong. So people are saying, oh, here's California. See how it's mostly red and blue? That's because this election map is old. So a lot of people who say there's going to be balkanization are looking at an old election map that was true 10 to 15 years ago. Let me show you the elections now, 2016, 2020. So even in 2016, this is all blue. Here's the Central Valley, 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 Central Valley. So this is all the conservative part that hates liberals. It's all blue in the 2016 election. And these are supposed to be the conservative parts that also hate liberals. They're blue in the 2016 election. We go to the 2020 election, they got even more blue. So the blue even more expanded. So, here it got even bigger. There's a little bit of resistance here where the red was. You can see this red pocket here, red pocket there, large red pocket here, large red pocket here. This is the Jefferson area. And then there's a pocket here and there. So this place will probably stay. This place will probably stay. This place will probably stay. But the entire rest of the coast, the Central Valley, even including these other counties here, is going blue, and all of Southern California. So this map, when we're talking about California, is inaccurate. It makes it look like California would be balkanized. Here's the reality. The reality 10 to 15 years ago, the reality now. The reality 10 to 15 years ago the reality now. And as I always like to say, as a Latino and as somebody who was born and raised, lived all over California, in the Bay, in Los Angeles, in San Diego, in the Inland Empire, in Sacramento, and then moved back to Fresno, the demographics of the Central Valley are only going one way because of people called Mexicans. So Latinos are not backing Trump. Yes, there is some number of that, but generally they turn liberal. And there's only going to be more Latin people and less white people in this area, according to every census and survey poll. Latin people typically will vote Democratic, especially here in California. That might be a different story in Texas. So all the trends are saying more brown people are going to be here. They're going to vote blue, and less white people are going to be here. So there's going to be less even conservative votes. And the fact that you have a lot of conservatives who are already leaving California makes this even more true. California has even less chance of being balkanized if it's separated from America, because a lot of the conservatives who are upset are already gone. They're not here to be left behind lines and upset. Now, how that relates to other states, I haven't done an in-depth look, but you can see a lot of states here are red with pockets of blue, tiny infinitesimal pockets. They would be just fine. Here's the 4-state solution. A lot of people suggest the entire West Coast should be joined. I can tell you here in California, there's not a lot of support for this. So the media will talk about, let's have an entire West Coast thing. And just off the bat, so this is called Olympia. Californians would never be okay with their new nation state being named after one of these smaller states. It's not going to happen. And when Californians talk about independence, they think of Californians. They think of these people as somewhat liberals, but they don't really know them. And the love of the idea is largely here. So this concept of the entire West Coast is going to go. I understand that that's very popular in the news, but I got to tell you, as somebody who's talking to the most people here in California about that, there's not much support for this. Let's see here. Again, more people back and forth. Show me where the Bible says it's sanctioned. It's saying they're righteous. Idea. Okay. People get sidetracked instead of focusing on the issue. So you're saying you support the Confederacy, did not see that coming from you. Then it's a lot of attacks on each other rather than saying they support the idea or not. Then attacks on celebrity opinions. And one thing I don't like is that none of these people are discussing the value of the idea. You could say you hate the idea. You could say you love the idea. But these are all just slams on each other. And why are we even talking about this? Mutual divorce problem is they don't get the nukes. Well, that's another one. People were talking about the division of the U.S. military. The fact is there's military bases all over the place. And California already has a gigantic amount of military bases here with nuclear arms. If we were independent, the nuclear bases would probably stay. Or they can move the nukes out, which Californians would not be upset at. So Californians don't really like nukes. And if we separated and the U.S. military said, fine, we're taking the nukes, that's not really going to be a sticking point for us. Nobody here thinks we should have nukes. They don't even like the nuclear power plant. And I'm moderately okay with that. So that's not really an issue for California. Oh, you're going to take the nukes. Take them. There are only blue states. There are no blue states, only blue cities. Again, that's that bipolar map, and this is the reality. So you see a lot of people talking about that. Another one, this is what I like talking about, where it says, we don't need to do secession because people just aren't voting right. And if you just use the system the right way, it would work in. A lot of times we talk about here is that the system is broken because of the Constitution bakes in that states have rights and people don't. And because of that, the system doesn't work like it did maybe 200 years ago. A lot of people don't want to hear that. And what they want to hear is if people just held their politicians to account, or the Republicans stopped cheating, or votes were counted accurately, then everything would pop back into place and it would work perfectly. Wrong. The Princeton University study showed that the American people don't get what they want in their laws since the 1970s to, I think, 2014 it came out. So the system hasn't worked for decades. And little tweaks aren't going to fix it. The downward trend is consistent going over the last 15 years of Americans' lack of faith across all branches of the federal government, the courts, the executive, and Congress itself. That includes during the time of Obama, that includes during the time of Trump, and that includes during the time of Biden. So even if you do have radical changes to who's elected and how it's ran, people are still losing faith. And when you look at how good the American system of democracy is for providing the actual will of the people, it is horrible. The Princeton University study in 2014-2015 concluded that the will of the people has a, quote, almost infinitesimal impact on what laws get passed. If you just, here, just don't vote Republican and everything gets okay. Then here's another person saying they accept it. That would be great. Don't do this, talking about secession is horrible, wall go down. Here's another one talking about you can't separate red and blue. They'll try to make these little things. But here's the thing. This could be broken off, and this could be one state. These little blue pockets are tiny population areas, and they're marginally blue. They would go with the red. This area could break off. This Chicago area here would be the difficult one because there's a lot of people here in a population almost equivalent to the entire state body. But the way to do that is you could have this become a little state. Remember, Maryland is tiny. Rhode Island is tiny. Nobody says that because Maryland and Rhode Island are small, they don't get to be states. No one. Why can't we have more little states? Milk, you mean one of California's biggest exports law? We have the third biggest GDP. We have 60 times 10th population. The rest of the city LA has a, please take this path. We will tax imports at 10% and step on you. So I like California, but this guy's wrong. This gets at the same topic that a lot of people say. You can't have secession or separation in America because immediately walls would go up and people would not trade with each other and they'd start fighting a war. Based on what? If you type in walls separating peoples and where there's real anger at the other side and they don't trade and typically they shoot at each other instead, it's not that very many places. It's not. Israel, Palestine, Northern Ireland, the rest of Ireland, even there, they took down the wall and they had trade. South Korea, North Korea, there are demilitarized zones and there are very aggressive border strategies between countries. But if you look up harsh border wars and walls between peoples, it's not that many. There's 210 nations and there's maybe like 5 or 6 that have this extreme, ardent, bifurcated system where they're like, we're building a wall and if you come over here, we're going to shoot you and we have nothing to do with you and we won't trade at all. Since the 1990s, the trajectory of 95% of all of the nations and all of the population of Earth has been more trade and the lowering of borders and barriers. NAFTA, the World Trade Organization, etc. So if you look at the trajectory from 1990 to 2020, which over 30 years, it is less borders, less walls, more trade, more travel between the two each other. So when I see people say, oh, if we split up, there will be no trade and there'll be wars, I'm going, based upon what? 5% of the world's population or 95% of the world's population? You're taking an extreme case that barely ever happens and saying it would definitely go this way. And what's ridiculous about that is a lot of people who are pursuing the idea of national divorce are saying, I don't want anybody to get hurt. I don't want us to shoot each other. So if you look at the conservatives backing national divorce, they're not going, oh, this is a great idea to go shoot down liberals. What they're saying is, this is a great idea so that nobody gets shot. That's the total opposite thinking. So if the impetus for national divorce is to evade violence and keep peace, then why would we assume that if we went with a national divorce, which was pushed by these people, that they would suddenly change their mind and go, you know what? When I meant secession in order to avoid war and engage peace, what I really meant was more war and no peace. That doesn't make any sense. Secondly, if you look at the trajectory of this continent and the entire world, everything's going to more trade. There's literally barely any evidence to suggest that states, because they became separate national regions, would choose to stop trading with each other. Countries who do not involve themselves in international trade appear as poor and destitute as Venezuela and North Korea. That's basic economics. Everyone on earth knows that. Everyone on earth knows you have to trade. Even Iran who does not like America, trades with other countries backed by America and with America, even Russia, even China. So you can look at these states that are aggressive towards America, and America's aggressive towards them, and they still say, let's have trade. The Russian government is not saying, let's never trade with other people. Neither is the Chinese government, and neither is the Venezuelan government. And when they had the embargoes on Iraq, that was not because Iraq wanted them. This is America punishing people to get them to do something by locking off trade. The point is that most people want trade, most nations want trade, and even nations that are hostile to each other do trade. And the only nations that do this level of bifurcation that people are using as an excuse for why we can't pursue national divorce is exceptionally rare when you look around the entire planet. There's little to no reason to think that this would go that way. Don't the red areas of California grow food and livestock? Again, 15 years ago, sure, not now. So here's the food and livestock area. This is all blue. This is all blue. This is red. But in the 2020 election, it got even more blue. So here's the livestock area. And I can even show you this. So here's the ag regions. And here's the areas that are likely to stay hardcore conservative based upon the trajectory of the elections. Here you go. They're darkened. And what you can see is that most of the high quality farmland stays in the area that's going to stay in part of California. All this red and green is the farmland. Staying in the liberal part, not going to go anywhere. It's going to be just fine. Did the dude say red areas are red states? Because as far as I know, California isn't a red state. Sorry, next straw man. Again, yes, California is a blue state with some red pockets, but largely the trajectory shows they're here, they're isolated. Again, this region could be cut off. The rest of California would be in just fine. This region could be cut off and join Idaho. Same thing with this and same thing with this. Because they're bordering another state, they could become their own state, or they could become attached to a red state, leaving the rest of California completely intact and not a basket case. Let's go over a couple more of these critiques. Following these rules, most states would quickly fall into poverty, and death would rule their borders. California would take longer as we have more space, resources, income unilaterally. It's not the only. I feel Texas and most of the Bible Belt would be okay too. Texas could survive on its own, and so could California. But I do agree with the statement a little bit in that a lot of states in America are actually third world level economies. They appear to be first world because they're lumped in with all of the American economy. But if you actually looked at just the economy of Louisiana, or just the economy of Alabama, or just the economy of Oklahoma, they'd be third world level on their own. That economic reality and the fact that everybody's been backing trade for the last 3 decades means that most likely people will continue to trade. You're not going to secede and go, hey, let's look forward to third world level standing. No one's going to do that. If they're going to secede, you're going to have to tell them that life gets better. Not life turns into the quality of living in Central Africa. That's just not going to sell people. So there would still continue to be trade, most likely, when we're looking at this. What happened in the United States, part of the United States, that would make the country instead of a state. The non-donor states most quickly be absorbed by other countries as their economy collapses. That's the same thing. So if you separate, and then the red states would become economically weakened. Not necessarily true. So this is assuming there will be no more trade. Why assume that? Why can't we assume the opposite? That there would be trade, given 95% of the rest of the world does that, and most of the people over the last 3 decades. You would think Brent would agree. So here's some more critiques and more support, etc. So again, this was Ron Perlman who made this comment, and the top thinking was, well, you can't secede because it becomes this bipolar mess. Nobody would trade with each other. And especially in California, it's red and with pockets of blue. We showed you in California that's not true. We talked about how trade would continue. And a lot of these critiques just aren't very valid. Let's take a look at Sarah Silverman. Now, Sarah Silverman said this about 5 to 6 months ago. Let's take a look at some of these. It would be a great idea, but we'd be at war with each other if it actually happened. Again, why? So why are you saying that about 5% of the nations and the world populations who do have horrible border wars and no trade with each other would be the example for America, when 95%, 90% of the world doesn't do that, and the trajectory of human action over the last 3 decades isn't that? Additionally, when we consider the fact that a lot of American states are aware that the products that they sell go to other states and other countries. So a lot of these red states, they're not that ignorant. They understand that the soybeans they grow and the beef they grow goes to other countries and to other states. Why would those farmers say, I don't want to make any money? Conservatives are good with money. They're good with economics. Why would they say, oh, we're breaking off and now I want my business to fall apart and collapse and I want to live homeless? People would not make a move of this level if they knew they would be economically destroyed or homeless. And they know that a lot of their money comes from trade. So they would continue to back that because conservatives are not economically stupid. Literally, what resources do Democrat counties have? Well, I'm not going to talk about the rest of America, but I can say here in California, we have the economy and all the food. Every single red state is dependent on taxes from the blue states. That's true. Not all of them, but they largely are dependent on cash infusions from blue states into them. However, if they merge together in kind of a conglomerate of red states, they might be able to, through the size of that combined economy, cover a lot of the lost revenue. The other thing is that a lot of red states will tell you that, yes, they do get money from blue states, but they're also hindered from making more money in their state on their own because of laws passed at the federal level by blue states. So if you don't care about environmental regulations and you have a forest full of timber that you can't sell, the way they're looking at it is, okay, I don't get that $100 a month that you gave me, blue states, but I have $200 worth of timber in my state that I could sell, that because you control the Congress, you won't let me sell. So your lack of regulation and lack of taxes would allow my state to be more economically prosperous, and that would cover the loss of what they call donor state revenue. Here's one of my favorite ones. That didn't work once. We did that once. It didn't work out well. True. But everybody was talking about war. So during the Civil War, nobody said, let's separate to avoid a civil war. Literally, the North said, the South are punks and we'll roll over them really quick because they're weak. And people in the South said, the North are punks and we'll roll over them because they're weak. You can look up the newspaper articles of the time. They were not saying there's going to be a war, and in order to avoid bloodshed, let's separate. They were saying, oh, those guys suck. They're going to be so easy to kick over in a minute. Nobody thought the Civil War in either side was going to go 4 years. Both leaders on both the Confederacy and the Union side thought this was going to be wrapped up pretty quick. They were for war on both sides, and they thought they would win. We are not saying that now. People are saying, let's not have a civil war again. That was horrible. Let's not fight with the other team. We might lose, and we would get people killed, and let's avoid the whole thing altogether. That's a completely different starting point. And the fact that the Civil War was so bad is what will keep us from going into a second Civil War. When the Civil War happened, they didn't have a Civil War before. Nobody projected the amount of loss of life and the length of that conflict. Nobody. Everybody was shocked. Now we know how bad it is. So the Civil War I see as a reason why this would work out well, because it would be a cautionary tale, versus a sign of how it wouldn't work out. Blue states could be part of Canada, maybe, but at least in California, there's not much support for that. There's literally millions of us living in these states fighting against every day these conservative policies that make it better. So again, the pockets of liberals living in red states. I showed you how most red states, that's not true. Certainly there are states where this is true, but the majority of the states, it's not true. They're overwhelmingly red with tiny pockets of blue that could become a microstate like Maryland or Rhode Island or maybe New Hampshire or Vermont. Or even the DC area, they proposed statehood for DC. That is a tiny amount of area. And nobody said, well, DC can't be a state because they're so geographically small. We just had that debate last year or the year before. Nobody said that. So if DC can become a state, so too can other heavily populated small geographic regions. They can become their own state, just like some people suggested New York City become its own state separate from upstate New York. Again, nobody said because of the geographic size of the New York metropolitan region, they can't survive. And nobody said that with DC, and nobody said that with Rhode Island, and nobody said that with Maryland. So why can't we have those urban blue areas break off, become their own states, or, as we saw on the map, join a state bordering them and become a blue region? Most of the states are solid red. And here in California, as we showed you, most of California is blue and going blue, and the parts that are hardcore red are in the far north and the mountains and could easily be cut off, and we would be just fine. Show you that again. And this article is my own. If you want to look at it, it's called If a Vote Were Held for California, Here's What the Nation of California Would Look Like. Again, a lot of people projected, here's the borderlines in 2017, 2017, 2011, 2018. These are different political movements who said, oh, here's the difference between liberals and conservatives. This is all conservative, this is all conservative, this is all conservative, this is all conservative. Here's what the actual voting showed. So we actually have politicians and thought leaders here in California going, oh yeah, of course. Tiny little strip is liberal. Well, no. Here's the actual elections. This is not just a little blue strip. It's largely blue all the way through, controlling most of the farmland and most of the urban area going forward. So that's just not accurate what they're trying to project for this. All right, a couple more critiques. I've honestly thought this and said this, why don't we divide the USA into 2 or 3 countries so each can keep more or less what they want? We can stop all this fighting. So that's someone supporting it. Like the UK, England, Scotland, Wales, it worked for us. We have nothing but love for each other. Exactly. So they were able to separate and break apart. And Scotland almost won the vote by, I think, 5 percentage points to become their own separate nation. Nobody in Scotland was saying, the moment we're independent from England, let's start a war with them and not trade with them. Never came up. And even when England pursued Brexit, they did not say, we don't want to trade with Europe. They said, we want to trade with Europe on our terms. So when we look at successful secession movements, nobody's saying, I don't want to have any international trade and let's build a wall. It just isn't happening. So Americans might be projecting that future, but that's not the way the world is going whenever we see this. Here's another word, United States of America, 12 hearts, I guess. Let's just, focus on being together. So that's a pretty good review of what Ron Perlman said and what Sarah Silverman said, and how it's inaccurate or inaccurate. So we saw that, these comments are 5 to 6 months apart. And it's becoming normalized. The conversation is becoming normalized. So they're saying, the topic of national divorce isn't that crazy an idea, and maybe we should look into that. And the criticisms are, if we broke apart, we'd start shooting at each other, we'd have no more trade, and then there'd be gigantic pockets of conservatives left behind and gigantic pockets of liberals left behind. We showed that that's largely not the case for most of the states, certainly not in California, and that the concept of warfare and a cessation of trading is simply not the way that most of the world's population is going, and is economically ruinous, and people just aren't that dumb. Thank you for tuning in. We'll cover more information as it comes up. You can always check us out here for National Divorce Talk Raw with your host, Marc Ruiz Evans. I've been following the subject since 2012. I wrote the book. I got the first article about it. And I've been literally meeting more people than anyone else and having more discussions on this particular boutique topic than anyone in North America. Thank you, and we'll see you again in the future.